My name is Graham Steele, and one of my main capacities at present is I am the Open Science Ambassador for Scotland for an organisation called the Open Knowledge International. That would go back to 2001 due to a personal bereavement in the family. I started to read the academic papers for the first time in my life. I guess I was always interested in science to a certain extent, but until 2001 I'd never actually read scientific papers, and when you launch into a brand new field it can be quite difficult to actually understand an article, what it's about. And for the organisation, it was a patient advocacy group that I was working with at the time. If you don't know what a paper is about, contact the author, email them. They might not still be alive, but the point I'm making is that if you don't understand, ask, and people will explain to you in lay terms. So this was to do with neuroscience, so I started to read papers on a much more regular basis. But to my main frustration at that time, having discovered PubMed, which is the main repository for published papers, quite often it's just the abstract, not the full paper. But the main problem I came across was I couldn't read the full paper because it was behind a paywall. Open access in terms of STM research and also for humanities and social sciences basically means that rather than information being closed and inaccessible unless you pay for it, all the information is made openly available, usually through our Creative Commons license, which basically means as opposed to something that's closed, if something is fully open and open access, you can access it for free, you can reuse it, you can remix it, you can share it without any restrictions legally. It's fantastic.
Okay. And what's the difference between green and gold open access?
In terms of open access, there's various flavours of open access, and the main two that exist are green open access and gold open access. They both have a synergy. There are advantages, maybe disadvantages of both, but essentially gold open access means publishing in a journal that is open. Most open access journals don't charge any fee for submitting a paper to be published if it's accepted. Around about 70% of open access journals are free to submit your research to, and around about 30% charge what's called an article processing charge to get your research accepted for publication. So that's one method of making your research open. The other option is what's called a green open access, which basically means publishing in whatever journal you want to publish in, especially closed journals. And round about 80-85% of closed traditional subscription-based journals allow you to archive a copy of your accepted paper, which basically means you can make essentially what is a closed paper open by putting it on a usually an institutional repository or maybe your personal blog or website. So that's two different ways of making your research open available so that anybody can do what they want with your research free of charge.
And so what are the main advantages of open access, making papers open?
Making your papers available to read to anybody. If you publish in a subscription journal, especially folk are addicted to what's called the journal impact factor. So, for example, if somebody celebrates their career by getting a paper published in Nature, Science or Cell, or what we call glamour mags, that's good for their tenure under the current system. But if you ask that person, has anybody actually read your paper? I don't know, I don't care. It's published in this journal. But the whole point of publishing research is to make it accessible. So I don't follow the philosophy of publishing in closed places where nobody can actually read your work, because what's the point of doing a paper if nobody can actually read it? It doesn't make sense to me.
So do open access papers, are they more likely to be more widely read?
More widely read, and there's a plethora of evidence that confirms that you get more citations for making your work open, either via green or gold.
Okay. And so you said you worked for Open Foundation?
Open Knowledge International.
Can you tell us a bit about Open Knowledge International?
Open Knowledge International used to be called the Open Knowledge Foundation, then Open Knowledge, now it's the Open Knowledge International. It was founded by an academic called Dr. Rufus Pollock around about 11 years ago. And Open Knowledge are all about making information available free of charge, data, open data. They're a big organisation that are huge into that, making works like Shakespeare open access. And in terms of data, unless it's private, personal, confidential information, apart from that, the philosophy of open knowledge is to make everything open, unless there are good legitimate reasons. But in terms of information about street maps, timings of public transport, the open research, open data, anything that isn't open, we make open where we can.
And I'm just thinking what I was going to ask. Okay, so are there any issues that arise with open access in terms of, let's say, open data? Are there challenges that are still to be overcome for sharing your data? Reasons why people might not want to share it? I'm thinking commercial, medical, anything that's has to be kept under wraps, privacy-related reasons. Yeah.
Can you repeat the question, please?
So, are there any issues that open access is still facing in terms of sharing open data?
I think the main issue there is that a lot of people don't fully understand the benefits of making data open. One of the main taglines that I like is one that I've used several times, but publishing research without data is advertising. It's not science. But if you don't publish your data, there's no way that people can actually replicate the work that you've done. But there's a great value in making your research, the outcome of your research open, but there's also great value in making the data open so that people can actually take the data and do things with it. Because I think the value of data is probably more important than the actual paper behind your research. So making data open has got a lot of significant advantages to not making it open.
Mm-hmm. And do any funding agencies and various other funding bodies, do they now have a requirement to make your data open?
Yes, indeed they do. My knowledge is generally much better for the United Kingdom, or Great Britain I should say, than the rest of the world. But there's currently 7 main funders of research, such as the biggest is the Wellcome Trust, who introduced our open access mandate in 2005. But of all the 7, Cancer Research UK, RC UK, etc., they all have mandates that have been put into place over the last, since 2005, it's getting stronger and stronger. That basically, if you get funded to do research, there's no option. You have to make it open. Again, green, gold. There's also mandates to make data open. And as of 2012, Wellcome Trusts, I'm not too sure if there are others that have followed it, but basically if you are funded by Wellcome Trusts and if you fail to comply with making your research open, you'll be punished financially. So open access has teeth.
Okay, is there anything else that you would like to say about open access, open data in general? Anything else related to academic publishing?
Not off the top of my head.
No. Or one more question then. How do you think academic publishing will change in the next 20 years?
It will change to become more open. As to the pace of that change, we don't know. One of the main problems with making progress in that change is that academic publishing...
Or one more question then. How do you think academic publishing will change in the next 20 years?
It will change to become more open. As to the pace of that change, we don't know. One of the main problems with making progress in that change is that academic publishing globally per year is roughly a sort of $12 billion industry. And most of that money goes to traditional publishers, such as Elsevier, Wiley, etc. And there's a challenge for them for making their research open because they stand to lose billions of dollars or pounds. But the change is moving to open. They're kind of cheating to a certain extent by maximising their profits in a different way, making stuff open but still making a lot of money. But the current system is, in my view, morally wrong because us as academics do all of our research. In terms of the publication of that research, we do all that work for nothing. We hand our work over to publishers, and you hand over your copyright. So once you finish your research, you're essentially giving it away free of charge, and in order to read your own research, you have to pay to get it back. I think that's morally wrong.
Thank you very much. One more question. Can you explain the Creative Commons licenses?
Creative Commons licenses have been around for roughly 12 years, and they're a supplement to traditional copyrights. If you think of copyrights graphically as a C in a circle, and that stamp, and traditionally, even if I was to have a piece of paper here and write 4 words or whatever, the second that my pen leaves that paper, that's copyrighted. I didn't intend to copyright it, but that's traditional copyright, C. The alternative to that in a digital age has got 2 Cs in a circle. And I'm not wearing one of my Creative Commons shirts today, but that is Creative Commons, which is a suite of licenses that are legally binding. They're machine readable, and it gives you roughly 5 different levels of how open you want to make your research. You can make it public domain, PD. That used to be called CC0. That's the most open license, which basically means I take my 4 words, and rather than putting a C on it, I put a CC0, and anybody can use my 4 words. So that's the most open, and there's then various other options. You can share it, but you're not allowed to make any derivatives. You can share it, but you can't make commercial use. So, for example, as a musician, I've released about 70 songs that I wrote over the years, and they're using different Creative Commons licenses. That was about 7 years ago, and my knowledge on Creative Commons is much better now than it was back then. But for example, some recordings that I did were of bands where I didn't actually write the song. So I didn't write the song, so therefore I'll make it open, but it's for non-commercial purposes. Because if they found out I was selling their song for nothing, they wouldn't be too pleased. So that's one of the main advantages of Creative Commons, is that there's a different tier depending on what suits your needs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.